Welcome to this short presentation about body horror. H.P. Lovecraft said, "Never state a horror when it can be suggested." Metamorphosis and entropy are our first steps towards body horror. Freud refers to a state of inorganicism, otherwise known as a death wish. This death wish, though, is not the desire for obliteration, but for nirvana. Freud termed this entropy. This desire for undifferentiation is referred to as the entropic pull. Horror uses this entropic pull to great effect. We are both repulsed by and fascinated with body horror. Metamorphosis can be seen as an aspect of the entropic pull, illustrating the unsubstantial nature of form. Irving Massey suggests that pleasure produces metaphor and fear metamorphosis. In horror, slipping from one form to another is no longer redemptive, but horrific. Disintegrated bodies and the fracturing of self can be seen in dual, multiple, and dismembered characters. Thus, horror also interrogates the notion of character. This can be particularly relevant when tackling the nature of sexual identity and relationship. In The Horror Genre, From Beelzebub to Blair Witch by Paul Wells, Wells defines body horror as the explicit display of the decay, dissolution, or destruction of the body, foregrounding bodily processes and functions under threat, allied to new psychological configurations and redefinitions of anatomical norms. Body horror, biological horror, organic horror, or venereal horror derives its horror principally from the graphic destruction or degeneration of the body, and this may involve disease, decay, parasitism, mutilation, and mutation. Other types of body horror include unnatural movements, the use of body parts, the anatomically incorrect placement of limbs to create monsters and monstrous things, like David Cronenberg's work. You can look at things like The Fly, Existence, Videodrome. It is the fear of losing ourselves in the physical sense and of therefore becoming something else. We're going to take a little look at this clip from American Werewolf in London. Earlier in the film, David was bitten by a werewolf, but he didn't know that's what it was. And this is the first point in his life that he's ever changed into a werewolf. Can be tempting to kind of laugh at some of this now. We're so used to CGI, but actually these effects are still really good. At the time, these special effects were groundbreaking. But if you're familiar with any kind of other werewolf changes in horror movies or TV, you'll see that this particular change is parodied. Those other parodies rarely go through quite the same level of change. Here it's just really painful. It's bone cracking. It's heartbreaking almost. We get a real sense that David isn't just changing physically. Once this has happened, he will be something else. He will lose himself into whatever it is he's becoming. It's like he's desperate not to change, like he's trying to stay himself, but he can't. A werewolf change should be painful if it's horror. And there we go. If you've seen the movie District 9, then you'll see this is a really good successor to some of the ideas that Cronenberg had and his disturbing visions of change. In this film, our protagonist, Vickers, undergoes a horribly painful transformation into an alien, widely given the derogatory name Prawns. What is interesting is that Vickers behaves inhumanly until he becomes inhuman. It is only at this point that he helps the persecuted aliens, and this still largely to help himself, until the end of the film, where he essentially sacrifices himself to save another. So this kind of departs from some of the horror kind of sense of loss of self, because Vickers actually becomes a better person in his change. However, the physical mutilation of his human body into the alien body is incredibly painful and takes a long period of time. And while I am talking about a science fiction movie here, it really is crossing over to horror, especially for the first 30 to 40 minutes. So in summary, the key to body horror is that change within the body is painful, and it may take quite some time, and it will impact the sense of self. I hope you found this little intro to body horror useful and interesting.